who is representing Friends of Canadian Broadcasting and Friend of PCHS also.
Right.
And he will just explain what this event is about, and then we can go around, make an introduction, and then we'll proceed accordingly.
For coming and braving the weather. I know this last week or two has been particularly dangerous for the roads, so we appreciate you all coming here tonight. As Arshad kindly mentioned, I am with an organization called the Friends of Canadian Broadcasting, and just quickly, the Friends is an advocacy organization that is essentially interested in standing up for the Canadian media sector, Canadian journalism, and Canadian content across the audiovisual spectrum. And increasingly, our focus has been on the media crisis affecting Canada and helping Canadians to understand the role that this plays in our lives in very real and tangible ways. And part of what we have found connecting with PCHS in particular is that in some cases it can have real, tangible life and death impacts on communities who depend on local news in their own language to stay informed about issues and services that are relevant to them in their communities. So today, we'd like to bring folks together to start talking about this. And I'll hand it over to Mahnoor Yawar, who is very kindly going to be moderating the discussion and guiding.
All for being here. As mentioned, I'm Mahnoor Yawar. I work for OMNI Punjabi primarily, but OMNI Television and Rogers at large. This was a very important subject for us. You know, representing ethnic media, we talk a lot about health issues in the community. We have a connection with, you know, Punjabi Community Health Services, with Brampton, with sort of the larger diaspora around the GTA and the issues that affect them, and I'm really glad we're having a conversation about the importance of doing that. So I'm going to introduce who else is on the panel. We have Baldev Mutta, who is the CEO and founder of the Punjabi Community Health Services, and for the last 28 years he has worked at developing an integrated holistic model to address substance abuse, mental health, and family violence in the South Asian community. So big welcome to everyone, someone we all know very closely. Grewal, who is the founder of The Pointer, which is a subscription-based, digital-only media platform that provides locally focused news to communities. He has won numerous awards for his investigative work over his 20-year career in journalism. And prior to The Pointer, he worked for the Toronto Star, where much of his journalism was focused on the Peel region and other parts of the GTA. So a big thank you to you as well, Sam, for being here tonight. And I feel like George introduced himself. I'm not going to go through that.
Thank you.
So I wanted, you know, all of you bring such diverse perspectives to this topic.
I think even before the crisis of opioid came into being, and especially within the last 15 years, the crisis of mental health came on the forefront. I remember back in the 90s, we were already talking about the health issues of our community in terms of addictions, in terms of domestic violence, in terms of parent-child conflict. So health from a global
Sorry,
perspective.
very quickly, can you guys at the back
Hear
us?
me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, okay.
So I think that the health from a broader perspective in terms of, even though back in the 90s the study hadn't come out, that immigrants who come to Canada, they come in healthy, and after about 7 years in Canada, their health becomes worse off than the Canadian-born population. So, and at that time, we already knew that there is something that the stressors that the entire settlement brings.
It was in Canada. It was predominantly, you know, Caucasian, sort of Anglo individuals that worked in the media and that made decisions in the media. And I don't think that was any sort of intentional effort to exclude others. You know, it was just at that time not a lot of people from diverse backgrounds were, you know, being recruited into the media, and not a lot of people were looking at the media as being, you know, a viable career and whatnot. So it tended to be quite homogenous, and it's changed dramatically, the media landscape in Canada since the 90s. Like up until the 90s, there was really not much change, but I would say I started to notice the change probably in the late 90s, you started to understand that there's a few things driving it, right? So demographic change was driving it, that, you know, when in an area like Southern Ontario, you've got such huge population growth, the vast majority or a large percentage of that population growth was, you know, these diverse communities coming, you know, in through various forms of immigration and whatnot. So the demographics started to change. And then the second part of that was that a lot of media understood the economics of the need to represent large segments of the community. You know,
Part of what we've been looking at and focused on as, you know, as an organization is tracking the change in our media landscape across Canada. Friends originally started with a focus on the CBC, public broadcasting, public benefit journalism essentially, but beyond that also the wider landscape. And this is particularly important when we talk about diverse communities across Canada, many of whom aren't served by the, as we're calling them, quote unquote, mainstream media. We know, I think in this room, we can probably just say it, that Canadian media are not in the greatest position. The challenge I think that media face, and journalists in particular, which is why I'm actually, I think part of the reason why I'm happy to be sitting at this part of the table is that while journalism in Canada and the media are in crisis, they're also not equipped because of their position to voice the crisis in ways that don't undercut their credibility.
Which probably allow me to vent out to the ethnic media. We are a platform called South Asian Advisory Council. Baldev ji is one of the most proactive persons on it, and he understands the value of how that platform can really be a voice for the community. But sadly, whenever we have any events or whenever we have any anything happening, I send out emails to at least 75 local ethnic media groups. Except for one group, and hats off to you, Mahnoor, OMNI Television, nobody responds. And that too also, I had to influence a friend called Jake Dheer to keep pushing people to come out. No other ethnic media group comes out. And what are we talking about? We are talking about poverty in the community. We are talking about homelessness in the community. We are talking about women abuse in the community. We are talking about all social issues which are there, which are non-political, non-partisan, and they are just related to our own real issues which happen within our homes. None of the media groups come out. What I have seen in ethnic media groups is that
today.
United Way?
Yes.
Oh my God!
But
Then that's a problem
honestly,
of your media group.
So if
not
you
of
are
United
not,
Way.
if
United Way is here
if
since
you
Okay,
are, if
okay.
you
I'm
are
gonna
not
bring
aware
it back
about
just
our
very quickly.
association where we have
Sir,
29
sir.
members, then why
No,
would
no,
we
but
know?
it's the
Sir,
media.
okay.
It's the media
All right.
groups.
Hold
responsible.
on, everyone.
Media
Let's.
groups.
I know.
But,
It's a
but we
huge
cannot
issue
say
right now.
nobody
Let's-
raised the voice.
Let's give
So
it.
that's
let's
why we
give
are
it a
getting
second.
offended, isn't it?
All right, I'm going to bring it back to you, Sam. Okay, so having worked in both mainstream and you mentioned.
One last point is that pizza is best. It's not have incentive to cover public interest story, the types of stories you're saying, and that's not fault of those because they will go for stories which bring some revenue, and this type of coverage requires a corporate responsibility, and that corporate social responsibility comes when you are a corporate and you are making some profit. If you're not making profit, your whole energies are making the model or template more sustainable. That is one, and that's where this conversation comes in, that we want government to incentivize production of Canadian content which is of public interest and which is not happening. And morality is one side, but practical and viability is the main thing which we need to actually hear from the people who are running TV and who are sticking their necks out.
No, that's definitely a very, very good point.
So may I few things?
Yes, I'm just going to answer one more and then definitely.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I think there's a miscommunication overall. I
Yeah.
understand that there are people out there that are trying to get a hold of the medias. So this is my personal experience. Every day, and every year, Sur Sagar does Path on behalf of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's birthday. I have personally contacted food banks to say, let's partner.
Discussion so far I heard, I have reached to the conclusion that I don't have any question because the talk is going to all directions. So I don't know what you're talking, frankly. Rather staying focused on staying healthy by staying informed. We need to define media in just 2-3 lines. What is media? Media is, of course, is kind of an outlet for journalism. And journalism is based on 3 components. One is reporting news. And in news, we have to stay partial. When it comes to opinion, there are all kinds of opinion. Opinion also comprise solutions, may have solution, may offer solution, and may not offer solution. And the third component is business, what Arshad just talked about. That's the hardcore reality. So, I mean, like for me, all this social media today is carrier. If Roger is not interested to take us to the audience, then Google is there, YouTube is there, Facebook is there. So they are carrier. We cannot pinpoint, okay, this Silicon Valley is bad. They are carrier. Because I remember in 2007 when Facebook was invented by a young man whom we know now, everyone, that
I'm a program host. I don't call myself a journalist, whereas what I see the trend these days with the social media and other carriers, as we say, that many of our channels, ethnic channels, we call ourselves ethnic channels. There's no issue with that. But we all categorize ourselves as journalists. I don't, but generally people call themselves journalists, whereas we are not. We are not trained to be a journalist. We are just hosting some programs. Some of us are doing it out of passion, just because it's next step, whatever we were doing as a community helper or worker or whatever. But some of us are doing it just to be on the screen, sadly. And so as a journalist, as I believe you guys are true journalists, so you are willing to mentor some of these new media or Canadian media or ethnic media people, if they are willing to learn.
Absolutely. And that's, what George is talking about.
Because now
Appreciate taking the time out to come. That's number one. Number two, I really want to thank all of the media people who are here. Anytime I have called or anytime I have wanted to convey my message, people have been more than generous to kind of relay. The third one is that I think Canada is going through some very difficult transition phase, and those people who are in the media, I think there is an additional burden on them to educate the community. What does opening up the Health Act would mean? Like Maxime Bernier, for example, wants to open up Health Canada Act if he is elected as Prime Minister. So I think those things are really, really serious. It's going to have major effect on us. And we don't have much time, but we have enormous amount of education to go to our community. Guys, wake up and start talking about it. What does it mean to not have universal health care?